introduction of our speaker today, Martin Katala. Martin has over 15 years of experience with geographic information systems for transit analysis. His experience includes mobile data collection, transit GIS analysis, transit performance measures, database administration, design, and project management. He has conducted geospatial analysis and database administration for all transit-related research within the center, and additionally has developed the state of Florida. He is a leader in the transit GIS community and is currently the co-chair of the National Transit GIS Conference and the National Center for Transit Research's Transit GIS Clearinghouse. Martin is also a member of the TRB Committee Spatial Data and Information Systems Committee. So with that, let me go ahead and I'll open Martin's presentation. And Martin, all yours.
Thank you very much, Phil. Can everyone hear me okay? I guess you can't answer that question, but Phil, you can. Again, thank you, Phil, for the introduction, and I appreciate everyone's interest in attending our sort of the results of our research efforts with the Federal Transit Administration. What we want to do is tell a story of what we went through, sort of the challenges and opportunities that we discovered through our efforts. But it would be a mistake for me not to recognize others who have participated in this effort. As I'll tell you a little bit in the project background slides, this was a group effort with people from other universities as well as those here at Qatar. Some project background. This is a collaborative research effort that we worked with the Federal Transit Administration between Qatar, the Oregon Transportation and Research Education Consortium, and Texas A&M Transportation Institute. Each of the groups had sort of a defined research roles, where TTI were defining rural livability, transit livability measures, OTREC were defining the urban transit livability measures, and Qatar was to develop a national transit livability database and dashboard or website. So those together, we tried to conspire, probably is a negative word, but we worked together to come up with measures that would be meaningful on a national scale, and this was sort of the context. Project goals, just to give you a sense of what we were trying to achieve and where we went with our project effort. Our goal was to develop national transit livability measures, and the purpose of those measures would be to inform stakeholders of livability measures, to impact decision makers. So we would provide FTA feedback on outcome of their current transit investments. We would provide transit agencies information about and make them aware of livability outcomes, and hopefully communicate with communities, as well as the cities and municipalities that oversee these communities, to help them consider livability goals and transit's role in these livability goals. I'm going to quickly go through the 6 livability principles. The livability principles were designed through a collaborative effort between the United States Department of Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, and the Environmental Protection Agency, which I suspect none of them are on the phone today for obvious reasons. The 6 principles address a variety of characteristics of quote-unquote livable communities. I won't go through every detail here, but I'll go over the 6 principles in a short order. Support existing communities, seeking to enhance the characteristics of communities. Value neighborhood and communities, which again is looking to target federal funding towards existing communities through things like transit-oriented development and land recycling. Promote equitable and affordable housing, which is seeking to expand the location and energy efficient housing choices for people of all ages, and with the goal of trying to lower the combined cost of housing and transportation for families in our communities. The other remaining 3 is enhance economic competitiveness, looking to improve the competitiveness of neighborhoods by giving people reliable access to employment, educational opportunities, and other services. Provide more transportation choices. Of course, this is going to be vital for our evaluation of transit livability, which is again looking to decrease household costs and reduce our dependence on foreign oil, as well as improve air quality and promote public health. And the final is to coordinate and leverage federal policies and investments. Again, aligning federal policies and funding to remove barriers to collaborate and possibly leverage funding to increase the effectiveness of programs for future growth. So given those as parameters, this is sort of the broad view of the research results that we went through. There were urban and rural measures that were developed both with the two partners. The urban measures were both developed in different ways, and the driving force was that of those approaches grew out of the available data. So on the urban measures that were developed by OTREC, they were looking at variables that influence urban ridership, and they were able to look at parcel level data, ridership data at multiple sites throughout the country to divine what are the things that contribute to urban ridership, which then in turn contribute to more livable environments. On the rural side, it was a little bit more difficult, of course, because the dispersed set of ridership needs as well as the sparse data available for this area. Nonetheless, they were able to identify measures, 6 measures that directly impacted by transit and that aligned with the principles. In the end, our job was to combine those two into sort of side-by-side measures, an urban livability measure and a rural livability measure on our website and dashboard. Some of the findings. The big finding was that you can measure livability, the impact transit has on livability in both rural and urban areas if the data was available on a national scale. The transit data, both fixed and demand response, is somewhat incomplete, so consequently the ability to create a national measure is not possible with the current state of data availability. Nonetheless, both of the partners that we worked with were able to enhance some of the data by looking at where the data was available, and we ended up using case studies on the rural side, and we used some, over 213, I think it is, transit agencies on the urban side. And we created a dashboard to present this information of transit livability, and again, I'll go through those as we move forward through the presentation. But the big question about our effort was addressing the challenge of defining livability. I think probably the biggest single challenge of defining livability is that it's a theoretical model. So the idea of livability is somewhat vague and unclear to define. And so that was the ability to define what that is for all communities. And this was particularly challenging as you looked at the varied sizes of urban areas and the varied types of rural communities. Trying to find measures that apply to all those different types was a true challenge, coupled with the fact that what livability is not always clear and the same to everyone. What we wanted to do to address those shortcomings and those challenges was to define livability using an index process that reports on relative livability, not necessarily absolute livability. And we'll show you that a little bit later on. Also the national scale, of course, as I alluded to, looking at the diverse communities, the vast array of data, and having it consistent across state boundaries is a challenge for ourselves. And then the analytic challenge of dealing with lots and lots of data. We're dealing with transit data, stops and routes, census blocks, streets and intersections, and we did lots of analysis for portions of the country that we had. And of course, the challenge with that was doubled when you were looking at the fact that there were a lot of places where there was no data. So let me tell you a little bit about the index. The index was to be designed to apply for both urban and rural measures. What we ended up using was TTI's rural methodology because we found it to be a combination of things that it was applicable and straightforward of an index, again, referring to relative livability and transit's impact relative to other communities. Again, speaking to the fact that there is no external validity of saying this is livable and this is not, we had to come up with the index approach. But also we were very mindful that we did not want our index to be punitive. We didn't want our findings to be something that was embarrassing or a challenge for transit agencies and communities that may be ranked lower on a list or may have a lower score. Our goal was for it to be informative, to inform communities, transit agencies, and stakeholders of this. These are the conditions and how public transportation is impacting the livability of their community. And we use sort of a straightforward, again, this is something that TTI developed, both Linda Charrington, Susie Endrington, and Jonathan Brooks were all very helpful in coming up with this indexing scale, and we came up with a simple, straightforward 1 to 10 scale for ranking the conditions of the communities that we evaluated. Another challenge that we looked, as I alluded to, the national scale data. Reliable, accurate, and precise available data is available at the local level, but there's no uniformity across local information. So, for example, looking at parcel data, you can get a lot of information from parcels. However, a parcel from one county to another, the data model that they would employ is not necessarily the same. There's no uniform standard for them. So that, of course, created a real challenge for us. What we needed to do was to find reasonable alternatives to local data. And these alternatives had to be at a national level. And we addressed those limitations in 2 different ways in both the rural and the urban settings. For the rural measures, we went about to collect rural transit providers information manually. We identified 8 states, and we collected information about the service characteristics of the rural demand response activities. On the urban side, we were fortunate enough, Mark Schlossberg and his team and Jennifer Dill, they were able to analyze a national data set, the LEHD data set, which is the longitudinal employment household data set provided by Census. It is essentially an employment origin and destination data set that is extracted from administrative records, unemployment insurance administrative records. And it's quite robust, and it's at a very small geographic scale, which means it's at the census block, which is the smallest geographic entity in the United States Census array of census products. And using the LEHD, the folks at OTREC were able to actually align commercial parcel data with commercial activity and employment locations where there is a very close match. So we discovered that the LEHD data is actually a very good data resource for as a substitute to identify certain commercial activities that you can extract from local parcel data. That was a great finding for all of us, not just for this project, but as we move forward into different research areas. And then the other element of the urban component, the urban index, required fixed route service characteristics. Again, how organizations store their data, there's no uniformity. Fortunately, over the past years, the General Transit Feed Specification, which is a data format that feeds into online trip planners like Google Transit, Bing Transit, and other open source tools, as well as mobile applications. GTFS is the data source. Unfortunately, many transit agencies or more and more transit agencies are storing their data in the GTFS format so that their transit agency and their users can actually plan trips using Google Transit and other web-based tools. So we identified the GTFS from agencies as a source for fixed route service characteristic data. It's actually an anecdotal comment, but 80% of trips, when you look at the total unlinked passenger trips on fixed route transit, 80% of those unlinked passenger trips are actually covered by agencies that employ GTFS data. So those are ways of getting around those data constraints. This is the 8 case studies that we worked with TTI, where we captured information about the rural providers in these states. We tried to get a good mix of certain rural types and places where we also had contacts where we knew we can call someone and speak to them. And this is sort of a display of the urban data sets, the GTFS data sets that we were able to evaluate. So this is the breadth of our livability evaluation. This is how far and where we're able to evaluate on a national scale. Again, as you can see, there's plenty of gaps of service. One of the big challenges that we were dealing with was the magnitude of the data. These are, because we were relying on a combination of the LEHD data set, which contained information at the block level, we were looking at census blocks for the entire country. And so there are 11 million census blocks. So even though we had places where we didn't have data on both sides, either on the urban or the rural side, we still use the analysis so that we could, if that data came through, our design of our database was that if new data came in, it could populate into our database. So we have a foundation of data that we're working with that includes over 11 million census blocks, and as you can see, a lot of block groups, tracts, and census designated places. And we'll talk to you about a little bit the census designated places, how we use that with our dashboard. And then another big challenge with the big data is that we're doing geographic analysis of this. So we're doing overlays and intersects of large data sets, including things like service area analysis around bus stops. Probably the biggest geographic challenge that we had when we were dealing with GIS was doing our service area analysis. This challenge was something that was important to us because we wanted to characterize the transit service characteristics at a very small scale so that we could inform communities at a neighborhood level as well as inform communities at a city and county and sometimes urbanized areas. So it was important to us that we had this small scale of geographic analysis. And for the 215 transit agencies that we were able to acquire their GTFS data, which covered 34 states, and over nearly 400,000 transit stops and nearly 8,800 transit routes, we performed this kind of service analysis where we calculated the street network distance, so it's not a Euclidean or a circle buffer, and we did an intercept of the amount of transit service that covered all these different characteristics that were vital to the livability evaluation. So with this analysis, we were then, what guided our analysis on all of these levels were the principles that we designed for the urban transit livability and the rural transit livability. So those measures, as we looked at each of the different types of environments that livability occurred, these are the urban livability measures. So it coincides with the National Support Existing Communities principle, and we derived these individual ones for each type of typology of community, urban or rural. I'll go a little bit into each of these. As you can see, support is existing communities. It's generally addressing pedestrian-friendly environments. So we wanted to find out how well does transit in this environment provide service to pedestrian-generating businesses and population. So our support existing communities measure is looking at the number of pedestrian-generating businesses which we acquired from the LEHD that was affirmed or validated by the research at the OTREC folks, and the population served by that service area. So that service buffer that I illustrated to you for each, let me go back one slide, this service buffer that I illustrated to everyone, for each stop we calculated the number of jobs that were served and the number of pedestrian generating businesses, and population served within that transit buffer. We did this again with valuing communities and neighborhoods where we looked at the intersection density at the transit stops. Is the transit stop in a walkable environment? Intersection density is a proxy for identifying walkable communities or neighborhoods. And then again, promoting equitable and affordable housing, we're looking at the multi-unit housing served by transit. So for an area that had multi-unit housing, how well were those more dense housing environments, how well are they served in their community? And we only were able to do 5 livability principles on the urban side because the challenge of identifying federal investments, we were not able to capture that information, and whether the transit is near a federal investment was not something we were able to capture. So we only focused on 5 of them. And again, to enhance economic competitiveness, we looked at the percent of employment, total employment serviced by transit. Again, this is not looking a little bit different than the pedestrian generating businesses and population, which speaks to mixed use communities. This is looking at how well it's helping people in a community get access to jobs. And then provide more transportation choices. This is probably the most vital component for urban livability. And we're looking at transit frequency, the number of times a census geography is served by transit. We created a quarter-mile walk buffer around every transit stop, and anytime if a block was the percentage of the block that was served, we gave them the frequency to that census block. So those were the urban measures, and we had to create separate rural measures. So in working with TTI, Linda Charrington, Susie Edrington, and Jonathan Brooks, we were able to, they derived measures that were directly related to what the rural transit providers can do and how they can impact. So they looked at National Transit Database information and devised a rural developed land measure per unlinked passenger trips. The rural developed land was actually a very clever technique to measuring transit should not be, the rural providers shouldn't be expected to provide transit to fields of corn. So what they wanted to do is to align, first identify the developed parts of the rural communities, and then use that as their sort of common denominator for evaluating how well communities are supported with rural transit service. Again, looking at valuing communities and neighborhoods, the annual unlinked passenger trips per transit needs population, looking at vulnerable populations in the community. Actually, there was a challenge to this measure because the 2010 version of this data was not complete at the time. In the future iterations, we will be looking at the 2010 data when we were first devising this. But it's still looking at the transit needs population, where we're looking at vulnerable portions of the population. And promoting equitable and affordable housing, the percent of household income not spent on transportation. So if there are places where they're able to have this measure, it's an indication that they're promoting equitable and affordable housing in these rural communities. Again, these are looking at just rural communities. Looking at the enhance economic competitiveness, active revenue vehicles per 1,000 square miles of rural land area. Again, something they were looking to do to an indicator of service to that community. Provide more transportation choices in a rural community. They looked at the percent of workers that did not drive alone to go to work. So looking at people that did not do that, whether it's in carpool or whether it's in a van pool or some other public non-SOV operation. And then the last one was to coordinate and leverage federal policies and investments. This is something we were not able to address on the urban side, but it's looking at the local operating funding per operating expense. So how much funding the local community puts into the total operating expense of the service is an indication that that community is leveraging the federal investments in that area. So with those as a backdrop, those principles, we're able to then give you a preview. It's actually no longer a preview, but it's what I will characterize as a beta website. It's available, and you'll see the address here, where people can go and type in information. People have already reviewed it. I know folks from TTI have done presentations on the website's link in the past, and we've actually already had feedback from some rural providers saying, hey, you're not characterizing our service, which of course is very meaningful and helpful to us as we continue to support this website. So as you can see, the transitlivability.org. We were wanting to develop 2 approaches for accessing information. The first approach, one is just a text search variety, and the other one is a web variety where you could browse and screen and zoom into the map to find your community. The searching features, that's text search feature, we actually captured every, there's a file called from the census called the Gazetteer, and it has every census designated place, county, and state name and urbanized area. So when you begin to do the search, as you can see, there's an autocomplete feature to it. And then actually when you click return or click on the bottom where it says click to see more results, you'll actually see all of the results that are in the United States that have the word middle in it. So Middletown, Middlesex, and other places where there may be counties and urbanized areas that meet that same thing. And then we also have a drill down mapping feature. So that map that you saw before, when you could zoom in on it by clicking on the map, and it brings up this sort of dialog box that you see this screen where it says you've selected a location, and you could see the drill down that you actually selected a place in the state of Florida, in Hillsborough County, in the urbanized area of Tampa, St. Petersburg, in the census designated place of Palm River, Clare, and at the census tract 13503. So you could choose to select those and it would zoom right to that geography, or if you wanted to zoom in a little bit more, you could zoom in or cancel. So it's an interactive map characteristic. And when you would click in this or select in the text feature, you would end up seeing the index scores for the area that you selected. What we're looking at now is the urban place. As you can see, the characterization of Tampa at the very top, and it gives you the score for the urban place that you're looking at in Tampa, and then it gives you the state score. Now, the one thing to articulate about the state score, it's not all areas in the state of Florida have this score. It's actually all areas that are in urban communities that also have transit service that we have data for. So that's we didn't think it would be fair to evaluate the state score including rural communities. So this is just looking at urban communities that we have transit data for. And for each one of these principles, you could drill down and to see greater detail of the measure that's there. And for each of the measures that we've developed, we actually have scores, raw score, as well as the index score. In this case, we're looking at the index score, support existing communities. And with a drill down, you would be able to see that the city of Tampa would have, looking at, for example, the provide more transportation choices, its score of 6.9 is its ranking in the area, but it's actually, you would actually be able to acquire the total number of trips, the average number of times a bus stops within a census tract within the city of Tampa. So with that information, we're actually able to do a combination of drill down information as well as generalized information, and you could drill up and down the index to get that information. The big challenge that with this index, of course, is that we're trying to generalize a piece of information that is hard to be clear about. And our goal was to, again, to indicate how well Tampa is doing relative to other urban places in the state of Florida, as well as you could drill down to communities within the city of Tampa and look at the how well your community is doing inside Tampa. So you would then see your community is doing better than a neighbor's community, and the community level analysis that we do is at the tract level. So when you drill down a little bit further, you're actually able to see tract level information about where you exactly live. So you see the challenges and opportunities with producing a national livability measure. There is the capacity to capture national information and produce it on a widespread scale if the data was available. And I think it's very vital for us to articulate the need to capture this information on a national scale, and not just for the livability purpose, although livability and sustainability continue to be vital to the US DOT and to Federal Transit Administration, it actually plays a role in other federal initiatives that I think are important for us to articulate and recognize. And these are just a list that I'll go through that are just some of the places that we could make where this kind of data can support. But I would also articulate that this kind of data can support things that we're not even recognizing yet. I mean, this is a new data age where big data is widely available, and the advent of the general transit feed specification, and actually there's movement to create a rural general transit feed specification to help people plan rural trips, and again that can speak to rural service characteristics. So this is an ongoing trend to more data. We are in the age of big data, and I think it's only going to be getting more and more information, more and more data is going to be available, and it's vital for us to convert that data into information. And we do believe that this effort that we've done has converted some disparate data sets, the rural NTD as well as the urban GTFS, into information that conveys the impact public transportation has on livability. But it also can provide other initiatives. In particular, MAP 21 has evaluation standards that they're looking to do, and the GTFS data, as we've discovered through this effort, can be used to measure different types of service characteristics in urban and rural settings. The one that we focused on after the fact has been developing transit accessibility measures using GTFS, so we can, at a very small zone, evaluate that. Also, there is an initiative in the federal government that's called the Transportation for the Nation, which is looking to create a seamless GIS layer for the entire nation. Currently, they're focusing on the roads since it's such a primary importance to our economy, but they are interested in moving in the direction of capturing more modes than just the street and highway network. And the GTFS data records, if we were to capture them on a national scale, would support the Transportation for the Nation effort that's coming out of the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. Also, Census, as they captured information in the American Community Survey, asks questions about mode choice for people that are participating in the surveys, and they use information to verify the mode information that was reported. A national GTFS data record can verify these mode choices, so they could confirm that this person is making a choice, is articulating a choice that is actually available. This would be one of the first steps for them to verify that information. Also, the national fixed route and demand response data set that could also be used to support the National Household Transportation Survey. Again, giving the assessment of transit availability of respondents. So you have people answering questions in the National Household Transportation Survey, and they're saying they did not take transit, but with the national, particularly an urban transit GIS repository, you could evaluate the people who are not taking transit but have transit nearby. So a national GTFS could be used to support this, and of course it would spin off a great many insights into the travel choices when we're dealing with the NHTS. And then the final component, since I'm a GIS person and I work with the National Spatial Data Infrastructure kind of world, the federal GIS program is looking to create a data repository of all things GIS, including all modes of transportation, sort of an offshoot of the Transportation for the Nation effort from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. So again, these several missing pieces do hurt our ability to develop a national livability measure on a broad scale, but it also can support other efforts, which we think is very vital as we move forward in this world. So those are our conclusions. We think there's a lot of missing pieces. We're excited about what we've produced with the National Livability, a Transit Livability website. Again, this is the transitlivability.org website. And for those of you, please visit and view your communities. We have been ground truthing it. We've had some information that we're discovering there's gaps in data, and some of that is because there's not all of the GTFSs are available for that community. And in that case, it's important for us to recognize we're trying to tag the communities where, like, not all transit agencies are represented from our analysis. I'm wondering, again, as we move forward, how we could continue to support this website and this evaluation and the data set. The website soon will be completed in the sense that we have all of their data evaluations performed, and we will be sharing what we characterize as the transit livability database, so people can actually download the full database and use for their own analysis, as well as browse through our website to get that information. With that, those are my concluding remarks, and I'm looking forward to questions from those in the audience, and I know I'm hoping there will be a few about what we undertook here.
Thank you, Martin. Just as a reminder of two things. One, today's PowerPoint slides are available by clicking the 3 sheets of paper in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, the little icon. You'll be able to download a copy of today's presentation. And to ask a question, if you click the Q&A up at the top left-hand corner of your screen, type in your question in the area right here, and then click the Ask button, and we'll go ahead and pull questions from there. So as people begin to go ahead and submit some, Martin, when you were talking about kind of using the assessment of the service availability, did you take into account the things like hours of operation of businesses and the hours of operation of the transit service in those corridors?
No, we didn't. We considered those, but we were not. There's really two questions. The hours of operation was something that we could not get from the business side. We could do the hours of operation from the transit side, but we hesitated to use that as an evaluation component because we thought it would be perhaps being overly critical of saying, oh, you don't have a broad spectrum of service, or 24 hours of service or 12 or 18 hours of service. We didn't want that to be, we were afraid it would be viewed punitively, so we chose not to include that component of the availability of transit service.
Okay. How about the consideration of, and maybe that doesn't even apply, of the existence of HOV facilities and managed lanes facilities?
Those
quality of service, I suppose.
Those were actually, we did look on when we were looking at this, we looked at that information when we were evaluating the intersection density, for example, because we were getting a national transit street network, and we had to eliminate certain street types. But we thought, well, could we include certain types of streets, but the national data sets that are available do not include those characteristics. So it doesn't even include speed limits. One of the other things we were hoping to include to evaluate if a place was walk-friendly was to say, oh, this is a street that has a speed limit that's over 40 miles an hour or something along those lines. But to acquire that information on a national scale was not possible. We would have to go to each state and normalize the data, although we think it would be important in terms of promoting the walkability of a transit stop.
Okay. In terms of, if you were to do this all over again, what would you maybe do differently, or?
Well, I think one thing I wouldn't do differently is I definitely wouldn't have avoided the partnership. I feel like the combination of the 3 teams that we've worked together with forced us to come up with unique solutions as we looked at the problem differently. I think the component that we would reconsider would be the rural data set. That was the biggest challenge because we had to manually capture that information. We probably, if I had to do it over again, I probably would have tried to work on designing a form to capture this information rather than us having to call it over. That was quite arduous, and actually the folks from TTI did the majority of that work, but we did it here in Florida, and it was not fun to capture, to call all the subrecipients for that. That was probably the biggest component that was challenging and not pleasant. I think the one other component that I would reconsider is on the urban side is to develop an index that was based on more than one variable. For simplicity's sake, we wanted to just do one variable for each principle, and we were able to distill each of the principles, and we were able to make one measure that really spoke to each of those measures. But I think the urban environment is complex enough and the data is intensive enough, and then that we could have used a lot more information to design those measures.
Okay. And you'd like to do a quick demo too, wouldn't you, Martin?
Yes, I was thinking that maybe we could show how the site works.
No.
Whoops, sorry. I need to share. I apologize.
Okay.
1 second.
All right. And as he works towards opening up the site so he can lead you through it, if you have any more questions, okay.
Okay.
You have one coming in here.
Okay. Are people able to see that now?
Yes.
Okay. One of the components I really wanted to illustrate is the drill down feature that we have. I'll use my neighborhood. So as I was characterizing the drill down feature, you are able to see this is the city of St. Petersburg, and you can zoom in even more to see the neighborhood characteristics. So this is provide more transportation in measure. This is the provide more transportation measure at this census tract, and this is the index score. It's doing it's doing better than other urban areas served in Florida, and we're actually able to drill down and actually look at the specific score. So this particular census tract is being served on average, the average visits per day. Again, we looked at it's an average across the 7 days, so it's not a perfect realization. But this census tract 202 is served 44 times on an average service day. So this gives the communities the ability to articulate, oh wow, this community is doing better than others. So you can see just adjacent to that tract is one that's a little bit further south, and this one has, actually this is again, it's in my neighborhood, it has a lot more service. It has a value of 60 per day. I actually know there's a transfer center there which would account for its difference. So users are able to browse up and down into the geographic needs of what they're looking for, as well as compare their city with other cities. I think the other component, Phil, that you alluded to, asking would we be interested in doing something else, but we were really sensitive to it, was to produce a ranking of all of it. Although the ranking information is here in the database, we were hesitant to create a ranking system which would say, oh, you're at the bottom and you're at the top. Probably if we're able to fine-tune the urban measures, I think that we'd be less reluctant to share that information. But I think a ranking does kind of motivate people to do perhaps a little bit more in their community. But again, we were so sensitive to being punitive. We didn't want that to occur.
Okay. All right. We have a variety of questions have poured in now.
Okay.
After you show the demo, I think it got everybody to submit. All right. The first one is, would it be possible at some point in the future to add a scenario planning tool that could utilize the index database to allow transit agencies to test potential plan improvements for their respective areas to see how their various livability indices would change as a result of the improvements? It may be a useful tool for helping sell decision makers on the investment.
I don't know who asked that question, but I love that question. Yes, I think it could be. I think the big barrier to that is, particularly in the urban settings that we're dealing with. In the urban environment, the data that we're relying on is GTFS, the General Transit Fee Specification, which has the stop locations, route alignments, and then, of course, schedule and trip information. The challenge with scenario building is the ability to write a GTFS file for a non-technical person. But if there was a tool that can help you build a GTFS on the fly, well, not on the fly, just build a GTFS, we can import the GTFS into our system and recalculate that information. One of the challenges and blessings of this project was that we have countless scripts that run for 2 or 3 days to calculate these values. And actually the GTFS values are actually some of the quicker scripts because we're dealing with a smaller area. So yes, it could be, and that would be, I think, an ideal place for this type of information. So this is how you're doing, this is how you could be doing if you were to improve your service in this manner or add this alignment. So yes, it could be used. I think the big barrier would be giving planners a tool that help them develop a GTFS.
All right, thank you. This next question is this process published somewhere for people to be able to replicate this process? Also, did you find that this score you created was comparable or better than the score given by the state?
The first part of the question, yes, we will give, for each one of the measures and resulting index, we will have a published document that will report all of the measures and how we went through it. The urban and rural folks have actually already articulated their reports and have explained how they got to those measures, and we will have our methodology. In fact, in some instances, we may share some of the ARC scripts. We use the ESRI products that can be used to help calculate intersection density as an illustration. But yes, they will be available when the project is completely closed. And what was the second part of the question?
Did you find that this score you created was comparable or better than the score given by the state?
By the state, I mean the score that we gave the state? I'm not sure. I know you don't know what the purpose of the. You're not asking the question. If I understand correctly, there is a difference between the state score, a statewide score, and the community score, whether you're looking at an urbanized area or a city. Mostly that it's actually hard to compare those two because the state score is looking at just, if you're looking at an urban area, it's just comparing it to other urban areas that we have data for. If you're looking at the rural communities, again, it's only comparing rural data where there is rural transit service. So the comparison between the two is trying to compare areas that are similar to what you're examining, what your examination zone is looking at. So if you're looking at a city, it's comparing it to other cities within the state. I think I'm answering that question.
Okay. Well, we'll move on because we have about 4 or 5 more I'd like to get in before the end here. One almost is a comment. I find it weird to consider questions of quality of service, including frequency, online help with bus arrival data, etc., would be considered punitive when that would allow the agencies to determine what factors help service improve.
I think you're right. That is a little bit unusual in a sense. However, I think transit agencies are very sensitive to the political fallout of getting a low ranking, so to speak. So we're trying to be mindful that we wanted this to be an encouraging tool for transit agencies in particular, and not a tool that says, I'm not going to look at that because they judge us poorly. I think there is a history of agencies being reluctant to pull back the curtain, so to speak, because there's fear that the criticism of the organization would be high and would cause a lot of political turmoil. As we all know, transit agencies do operate in a political environment. So we're trying to be sensitive to the political environment that they're operating. But generally, I agree This information is a reflection of reality, and if you want that reality to change, I think it helps the transit agency articulate that change. We need to increase frequency, for as an illustration, or expand the span of service. But we were just mindful as we were going through this. We didn't want this to be a combative tool. We wanted it to be a tool that hopefully agencies would look to help them articulate their case without it being sort of something embarrassing, so to speak.
Okay. Probably a very helpful question here, just to confirm what the data source acronyms LEHD and GTFS stand for, and are they both census data sources?
Very good question. I should have articulated that clearer. The LEHD is a census data product, and that stands for the Longitudinal Employment Household Dynamic. And so that is something that you could, if you type in LEHD census, you'd be able to find their website and download. They have actually 3 products. One that is a worker area characteristic, one that is a resident area characteristic, and then the final, which is an origin and destination file, which actually shows you the origin and destination of workers, their home and work destination information. It's a great piece of data for those of us who are data geeks. And the GTFS is actually not a piece of information that's available from anyone other than from the agencies. There is a loose organizational structure that people are willing to share information, but it's not available in a formal manner. You actually are relying on other tools.
Okay, 3 more questions. Next is, how frequent are the livability scores updated for an area, particularly for fast-growing areas?
Right now, it's a static shot, so we haven't moved forward for updating this information. The research project is nearly to a close, and so this is, in some regards, a snapshot. We would like to be able to update those, and with GTFS data changing almost quarterly, in our mind, we could see this being updated on a regular basis, but we don't have a mechanism yet for that to occur. But it could happen. So right now, it's a static shot that's looking at, I forget the time frame. I know I've written it down. I think it's early 2012 GTFS data.
Okay. And as we go to the next 2 questions, just as a kind of a reminder, on the screen is a brief evaluation. We hope you take an opportunity to complete it before you leave today. We will apply for certification maintenance credits through the American Planning Association for those that have AICP credentials. So you need to fill this out and provide your contact info at the end, and we will notify you when APA approves the certification maintenance credit. Okay. The last question I have here is, can we have it directly compare neighborhoods with the city totals or just the state totals?
Right now, it's just to the state totals. The data is possible, but we haven't presented it that way in the website. The data is there, we just haven't presented it that way in the website. So when we offer the data as a download, that is something people can do. We make it, it's a very straightforward download where it's just the zone and the raw score and the index score for each of the variables that we're looking at. So you could compare them, but right now our website is not designed to do that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Martin, for a very informative presentation today. Again, the copies of the slides are in the upper right-hand corner if you click 3 sheets of paper. This has been recorded and should be available on the Cutter website within about 24 hours. That's www.cutr.usf.edu for those that would like to hear it again or share it with colleagues. Again, this is part of the Cutter webcast series. It happens bi-weekly, Thursdays, noon, same time, same place, same location, same link, same phone number. So we'll hope to see you again in a future Cutter webcast. Have a great day. Thank you.